In today's episode, we're diving into one of the most inspiring stories in the Bible, the courage of Esther, a young woman who defied the odds to save her people. But before we get started, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell and leave a like. It helps us spread these messages to even more people. The story of Esther takes place during one of the most fascinating periods of ancient history, in the Persian Empire. Esther was a young Jewish woman living in a foreign land, and what happened to her would not only transform her life, but also the history of her entire people. Let me explain. Esther was like a secret hero. No one knew she was Jewish, but hold on, we'll get to that part soon. First, we need to understand how Esther ended up in the palace and how God was already working behind the scenes to pave the way. Esther was a young woman raised by her cousin Mordecai after she was orphaned, but her life took a dramatic turn when King Xerxes, known for his volatile temper, decided to remove his queen Vashti. Why? Because she refused to appear before him at a feast, which was seen as a grave insult. Back then, the standards were very different. Vashti's removal led to a search across the kingdom for a new queen, and that's how Esther, a humble young woman, was taken to the palace. Esther found favor with everyone she met, especially the king, who chose her as his new queen. But here's the twist. Her cousin Mordecai had advised her not to reveal her Jewish heritage, and Esther obeyed, keeping her identity a secret. This secret was risky, and you can probably guess it would lead to trouble later on. But Esther's obedience to Mordecai was crucial for the plan that God was about to reveal. Now enters Haman, one of King Xerxes' most powerful officials. Haman was driven by pride and ambition. When Mordecai refused to bow to him, Haman was furious. Instead of targeting just Mordecai, Haman plotted to destroy the entire Jewish population. Can you believe that? All because one man didn't bow to him. Haman's ego was bigger than the palace. He convinced the king to issue a decree for the annihilation of the Jewish people throughout Persia. This threw God's people into despair. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he mourned by wearing sackcloth and ashes, a traditional sign of grief, and went to the palace gate. Mordecai sent a message to Esther, asking her to plead with the king on behalf of their people. But here was the problem. No one, not even the queen, could approach the king uninvited. Doing so could mean death. Imagine the pressure Esther felt. She was young, with no political experience, and now she faced this enormous challenge. But Mordecai reminded her of something profound. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? That statement changed everything for Esther. Esther faced a life-altering choice: stay silent and protect herself, or risk everything to save her people. After deep reflection, she made a courageous decision to approach the king uninvited. But she didn't just act impulsively. Esther asked Mordecai to organize a 3-day fast among the Jewish people, and she and her attendants also fasted. This wasn't just a show of devotion. It was an act of complete reliance on God. Esther understood that she needed divine guidance to face such a monumental challenge. It's inspiring, isn't it? Esther could have stayed in the comfort of the palace, but she chose to act. How many times do we opt for the easier path instead of stepping out in faith? Esther's courage and faith are a powerful example. After 3 days of fasting, she prepared herself for the critical moment, to step into the king's presence without an invitation. The fast wasn't just about seeking divine intervention. It was also a way to unite the Jewish people in prayer and reliance on God. Esther knew her life was in God's hands, and that trust gave her the strength to move forward. It's incredible to see how faith can bring people together. This wasn't just Esther's battle. It was a fight for her entire community. This story reminds us that no matter how daunting the challenge, faith and courage are our greatest weapons. So let me ask you, when was the last time you needed courage to face a difficult situation? Share your experience in the comments below. Let's inspire one another. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's so much more to come, who knows? Your story might inspire someone else. Next time, we'll see how Esther put her plan into action, breaking palace rules to save her people. You won't want to miss it. At the heart of the Persian palace, protocol was everything. No one could approach the king without being summoned, not even the queen herself. Anyone who dared to violate this rule faced death, unless the king extended his golden scepter as a sign of mercy. This rule wasn't just about control, it was about maintaining an aura of divinity around the king. In Persian culture, the king wasn't seen as just a ruler. He was almost a godlike figure, unreachable and supreme. Now imagine this. Queen Esther, knowing the urgency of her people's situation, was faced with an unimaginable choice. She could remain silent and safe, or risk her life by breaking this unyielding rule to approach the king uninvited. The weight of this decision must have been unbearable. Picture Esther standing at the edge of this choice, her heart racing. Every step toward the throne could be her last. This wasn't just a matter of courage, it was a test of faith and trust in God's plan. After 3 days of fasting and prayer, Esther knew the time had come. She put on her royal robes, a symbol of her authority as queen, but also of the immense risk she was about to take. Step by step, she walked toward the throne room, a vast, intimidating hall where King Xerxes sat in regal splendor. Can you picture it? The grandeur of the throne room, the king seated high above, and the tension hanging thick in the air as everyone turned to watch Esther's approach. Each step felt like an eternity. Esther's life hung by a thread, dependent on a single gesture from the king, the extension of his golden scepter. The entire court must have held its breath as she stood there, vulnerable and exposed. And then the unthinkable happened. The king extended the scepter. In that moment, relief washed over Esther, but she knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. This moment wasn't just a testament to Esther's bravery, it was a display of divine providence. God was with her, guiding her steps, giving her the strength to stand in the face of overwhelming fear. Standing before the king, Esther could have immediately pleaded for her people's lives, but instead she chose a different path, one of patience and strategy. Instead of making her request, Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared specifically for them. Imagine the king's curiosity. Here was Esther risking her life to approach him, and instead of stating her case, she invited him to dine with her. The mystery must have intrigued him. At the banquet, the king was so pleased with Esther that he offered her anything she wanted, up to half his kingdom. But once again, Esther didn't reveal her true request. She asked the king and Haman to join her for a second banquet the following day. Why didn't she speak up? It wasn't fear, it was wisdom. Esther understood the importance of timing. She was carefully setting the stage, ensuring the king would be in the right frame of mind to hear her plea. This patience, this calculated approach, shows the depth of Esther's wisdom. She wasn't just courageous, she was also incredibly strategic, relying on God's guidance every step of the way. Meanwhile, Haman left the first banquet, feeling on top of the world. Being invited to a private dinner with the king and queen was a great honor, and his ego swelled with pride. But as Haman walked through the palace gates, he saw Mordecai. And there Mordecai stood, refusing to bow or show any respect. Haman's joy turned to rage. In his arrogance, Haman decided he couldn't wait any longer to deal with Mordecai. He ordered the construction of a massive gallows, planning to hang Mordecai the very next morning, before the second banquet. Think about this. Haman thought he was in complete control. He believed his power and influence were unshakable, but little did he know, God was already working behind the scenes to turn his plans upside down. Haman's pride and hatred blinded him to the divine forces at work. He was so consumed with his vendetta against Mordecai that he couldn't see the disaster looming over his head. That same night, while Haman plotted his evil schemes, King Xerxes found himself unable to sleep. Seeking a distraction, he ordered the royal records to be brought and read to him, a seemingly mundane decision, but one orchestrated by God. Imagine the scene. The king, restless and frustrated, listening to the monotony of court records. And then a particular entry catches his attention. It's the account of how Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate him. The king realized that Mordecai had never been rewarded for this act of loyalty. Talk about perfect timing. God's hand was evident, aligning events in a way that no one could have predicted. The next morning, the king summoned Haman. Without revealing the subject, Xerxes asked Haman, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman, assuming the king was referring to him, suggested an extravagant public ceremony. He described a parade through the city, with the honored man wearing royal robes and riding the king's horse. Can you imagine Haman's shock when the king commanded him to do all of this for Mordecai? The humiliation must have been unbearable. Haman, who planned to execute Mordecai, was now leading him in a royal procession through the streets. This moment was a clear demonstration of God's sovereignty. Just when things seemed darkest, God turned the situation around in an instant. The day of the second banquet had finally arrived. Queen Esther knew this was the moment to reveal her request. Her heart was prepared, her words carefully chosen, and the setting meticulously arranged. Everything about the evening exuded grace and intention as she welcomed King Xerxes and Haman into the royal dining hall. Can you imagine the pressure she must have felt? This wasn't just an ordinary dinner. The fate of an entire nation rested on her words. But Esther was no ordinary woman. She was a queen with a divine purpose, and she was ready to step into that role. As the banquet progressed, the king, ever curious, asked her once again, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." This was an extraordinary offer, a sign of the king's favor and trust in her. But Esther's heart was not set on wealth or power. Her request would touch something far deeper. Taking a deep breath, Esther began to speak. She looked at the king, her voice steady but filled with emotion, and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request." The king's expression shifted. Shocked, he asked, "Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" With courage and precision, Esther pointed directly at Haman and declared, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." Imagine the room at that moment. The air must have been electric with tension. Haman, who had walked into the banquet with pride, now found himself at the center of an accusation that shook the very foundation of his power. King Xerxes was furious. Betrayal is a bitter pill to swallow, especially when it comes from someone close. Rising from his seat, the king stormed out into the garden, his mind racing to process what he had just learned. Haman, however, was gripped by sheer panic. His carefully constructed plans were crumbling before his eyes. He fell at Esther's feet, begging for his life. But in his desperation, he made a critical error. When the king returned to the room and saw Haman too close to the queen, his anger boiled over. "Will he even assault the queen while she is with me in the house?" Xerxes roared. His words sealed Haman's fate. Guards immediately seized him, and one of them mentioned the gallows Haman had built for Mordecai, the man who had saved the king's life. The irony was undeniable. Haman was hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. In a matter of hours, the man who sought to destroy the Jewish people was gone. It was a powerful reminder that arrogance and evil often lead to one's own downfall. Yet even with Haman's death, Esther knew her work was not finished. The danger to her people remained, and her courage would need to shine even brighter in the days ahead. Though Haman was dead, his decree against the Jews remained irrevocable. According to Persian law, once a royal decree was issued, it could not be repealed. This meant the threat of annihilation still loomed over the Jewish people. Esther, understanding the urgency of the situation, approached the king once more. This time her determination was even greater. She fell at his feet, weeping, and pleaded with him to intervene. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor, let an order be written to overrule the dispatches that Haman devised to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces." Her boldness was astonishing. Esther had already risked her life once, and here she was doing it again. Xerxes, moved by her courage and conviction, granted her request. He gave Mordecai the authority to draft a new decree that would empower the Jews to defend themselves. This moment was a turning point. The new decree didn't erase the old one, but it gave the Jewish people the right to fight back. It was a testament to God's providence that even in the face of an unchangeable law, a way was made for his people to survive. With the new decree in place, the Jewish community mobilized. There was no time to waste. They knew that many enemies would still attempt to carry out Haman's original plan, but now they had the legal right to defend themselves. This shift in power was monumental. What had once been a community of victims now transformed into a united force, ready to protect their families and their faith. Mordecai, now in a position of high authority, played a crucial role in organizing the preparations. The courage of the Jewish people was remarkable. They weren't professional soldiers, but their determination was unshakable. They trusted that God was with them and that He would give them the strength to prevail. As the day of the battle drew near, the tension in the air was palpable. Families gathered to pray, to strengthen one another, and to prepare for what lay ahead. It was a time of both fear and faith, a moment that would define their history. The day that had been marked for destruction became a day of deliverance. When the enemies of the Jews came to attack, they were met with fierce resistance. The Jewish people, united and empowered by the new decree, fought back with courage and skill. The victory was decisive. In every province, the Jews triumphed over their enemies. What was meant to be a day of mourning turned into a celebration of survival and divine intervention. This was no ordinary victory. It was a testament to the faith and resilience of a people who refused to give up, even when the odds were stacked against them. And it was a powerful reminder of God's faithfulness. He had not abandoned His people. Instead, He had used Esther and Mordecai to bring about a deliverance that would be remembered for generations. The story of Esther doesn't end with the battle. Her courage and faith inspired the establishment of the festival of Purim, a yearly celebration to commemorate the Jewish people's deliverance. Purim serves as a reminder of how God works through ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Esther was not a warrior or a ruler by birth. She was a young woman who chose to trust God and act boldly, even when the stakes were life and death. This story challenges us to reflect on our own lives. How often do we step out in faith, trusting that God will guide us? Do we have the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it's difficult? As we close this chapter, I invite you to think about the moments in your life when you've had to rely on courage and faith. Share your stories in the comments. Let's encourage one another with how God has worked in our lives. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. There's so much more to explore in these incredible stories from the Bible. Until next time, remember, with faith and courage, we can face even the most powerful enemies.